Welcome to the Multigen Mini Masterclass. Real stories, honest insights, and expert tips on multi-generational living. Whether you're thinking about it, already living it, or just curious, you're in the right place because we're your go-to resource. Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to today's Multigen Mini Masterclass. It's going to be such a good episode. I've been waiting for this one because it's going to be packed with inspiration, systems and processes, which is my love language, real talk about living multi-generationally while also building wealth and little people and harmony and all those good things. So I am thrilled. This is Kimberly Spencer. We connected years ago in a high earning women's networking group. We have since, we instantly clicked, right? We have worked some together. We've been friends. We've traveled to events. We have done the things. And I love that our relationship has kind of been one of mutual support when it comes to business, momhood, wifehood, all those things. And it's really refreshing when you find your people. So when I found out that Kim was navigating multi-gen living, she's a few years ahead of me in this journey. I knew that I had to bring her in to share wisdom and insights. So Kimberly, let me do your intro so everyone knows who you are. What a powerhouse. Kimberly is a CEO, a founder, an Amazon bestselling author, a mom of almost three within the next few weeks, a daughter to one, a wife. She and her family are navigating life all under one roof. And she is here to share the challenges, the systems that keep it running, and the joy of raising the next generation of entrepreneurs, all while homeschooling, right? You're homeschooling.
Yep.
There's so many things. Welcome, welcome.
It's so good to be here with you, Erin. I'm so excited to have this conversation because you're right. Like this, so many people are now, especially those elder millennials. I don't really love that name, but like as an elder millennial, we're navigating not only aging parents and sometimes parenting aging parents, as well as parenting our own children and raising little humans. And there is this middle ground that we are in that doesn't have a lot of resources. So I'm so glad for what you're doing with this brand and what you're building.
Thank you. And thank you for being part of it and being so enthusiastic to help spread the lessons. So let's start at the beginning of your
Yeah.
multi-gen journey. You mentioned that in 2019, your family moved with your parents temporarily to pay off some debt, save for a house, all that jazz. What was that time like? And how did it prepare you for what you're doing now?
So that time was really difficult, especially for my husband. So not only am I multi-generational, like with having my mother under the same roof, but my husband's of a different generation. He's 19 years older than I am.
Okay.
So he's a Gen Xer. I'm a millennial. Our kids are, I don't know what generation they are. They're 7 and 3 and one to be. And that 2019 was incredibly difficult, but also so divinely aligned. And I will always trust my intuition. And my husband and I, we had invested about $100,000 into businesses, education, coaching programs, everything we needed to do that really helped. Like it skyrocketed my business. And then we had some real estate investments fall through
Yep.
that put us into some debt. And I was like, this is crushing. We're constantly, struggling with this battle between debt and wealth growth. I said, what if we just for a year moved in with my parents to be able to help with babysitting because I was struggling. My kid was I only had one at the time. He was a toddler. Toddler years are hard for me. Newborn, I can crush that. Like newborn, I've grown two businesses with babies with newborns. But toddler years,
Oh,
that
another
was
can of worms.
whole nother can of worms. I lovingly call it the FU3s because like it was really challenging. And I said we could use a little bit of support. We could use a little bit of breathing room. I could use the babysitting. Like my mom could use some support because I'm a second generation entrepreneur. My dad was really struggling also at the time. His brother had committed suicide a few months prior. And he was struggling with his mental health, with still being addicted to opioids, which I didn't know was as extensive as it was, and dealing with trauma and loss. And that combination, like I knew my mom needed support. I just felt a gut calling. And so we moved back into my childhood home for a year. And my husband's like, how long do you really think this is going to be? Like, this is really hard for him as a Gen
Sure.
Xer. And I said, I feel like it's only going to be a year. Fast forward to March of 2020, we were perfectly set up to end up staying and living in Australia abroad for 2 years while we were, because all of our stuff was already in storage.
Right.
So it made it really simple, really easy. We didn't have any rent or mortgage to go back to. We were able to build wealth and start like paying down debt over that course of the year. But within that course of the year, my dad had to go into the psych ward. My mom was navigating selling a property and running a multi-million-dollar business and looking for a part and creating a strategic partnership, which I was helpful. Like I've watched my parents grow a business for 30 years. And that experience of being able to be there for her, with her, kind of walking through that was really helpful. And then when we needed the break from my family, we were very much able to say, we'll stay in Australia, we'll stay a country away, an ocean away. And that was the breathing room, because it was really challenging with my dad, like
Sure.
being there. Like he was still navigating grief. He was navigating, we had to ended up having to put him in rehab. He came back from rehab and he just wasn't mentally the same. Like there was still a lot of unprocessed trauma. And I was like, I just feel like it's better for us to stay in Australia. So we ended up staying in Australia. My dad ended up passing in 2021.
I'm sorry.
And that 2021 was a year of just like massive initiation. Like in 2020, I ended up scaling my business 300%. 2021, another 150% growth while having a baby, while losing my father, while then losing also simultaneously, my mom lost her sister and her mother in that year too. And so by 2022, we knew we had to come back and support my mom, because she was navigating not only managing the business that she and my dad had run together, but also 3 estates, which, like we were saying before,
Full-time
like
job.
it's a full-time job. And especially because she had gotten her sister to sign the will, just a will, 3 days before she passed.
Wow.
Her sister was not as much of a planner as my mom. And then that experience of moving back, and then we were back under my childhood home and that roof, but it was very different. Like it was different because my
Sure.
dad was gone. It was, the energy was different, and my husband and I always kind of knew that my mom would end up living with us.
Okay.
We've been together for 13 years. We used to go take farmers market walks in Pacific Palisades, and we had this dream house that we saw that had a little ADU that I was like, that would be perfect for my mom. I've just always felt like she was going to be living with us in as we grew. And so that's what manifested. And the plan was never to stay in California. Our plan was always to move to Texas. My husband's from Texas. We love the tax breaks of Texas, the lack of state income tax. It was just a much better business decision. My mom's retirement money could go farther. I ended up supporting her and getting a buyout for her business.
Nice.
And then she was able to successfully exit, which is unheard of in the tree industry. And then we all just moved together and bought a property. And now I could not be more grateful, especially for this time right now. She's currently taking my kids to the museum. I'm very, very, very pregnant. And like, I'm so grateful to just have her under the same roof. And just like it's always been, like, it wasn't our plan to have her stay under the same roof. So we have enough space to build her own space, to build her own unit. So that's
That
the
was what
plan
I
for
was
the
going to
next
ask.
two
I
to
knew
three
you
years. Yeah.
mentioned. So, how does that? Okay, before we get to the possible new building, did your mom also have that gut feeling that you guys would live together too? So, or did you
She,
have to have a conversation? How did that transition from her side go?
from her side, she, like, when my dad was alive, she knew the plan was always to move to Texas at some point. We just didn't know when. And she was always the one telling my dad, like, I'm an only child. So she was like, if my
Same.
grandbaby and my and my daughter are moving to Texas, she's like, I am moving there too. And you're gonna have to either come along or like figure it out.
Yep.
He was never fully on board, which is so, it's so interesting given like where we live is so reminiscent of him. um
Interesting.
like his name was Rock, and we literally live in the town of New Brown Rock, like translated from German. So like the synchronicities are so beautiful and pure, and so I know I've been guided here from the best side of my dad, and we actually have a very strong spiritual connection, I would say, like
That's
after he's
beautiful.
passed, without the clutter from the drama of his humanity
Sure.
that he struggled with. Yeah.
Sure. Well, and I can relate on a personal level, having had a family member severely struggle with addiction and mental health, and the roller coaster that it can take a family. And I can't imagine it being your dad.
Yeah.
But just the helplessness that you can feel at times, the anger, the sadness. I mean, it's just crazy. So I love that you have found this place of good spiritual connection with your dad, because I don't think coincidences don't happen. So the
Yeah.
fact that these little things are lining up, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And I'm
It's
glad for your
it's
mom that it's got to feel that way somewhat for her too, I would think.
yeah. Yeah, she we comment constantly on like there are certain things that I don't miss. And same with her. Like we were looking through some old videos of home movies, and she's like, she and I both got on edge. And it's kind of like when you've been living with an addict and growing up with an addict. Opioids were never the biggest problem. Alcohol was. I staged my dad's intervention in 2016. And had he still been drinking, we wouldn't have had a relationship. We would have never moved in. He
Gotcha.
he had gotten sober off of alcohol. That one was the one that turned him into an asshole. But the but opioids were a manageable weirdness. Like that was just, it was absurd. Yeah, one time I said this in my TED talk. My dad came home with a mantelpiece, like just I went on a shopping spree and brought home a mantelpiece. And I was like, we don't, there's no fireplace. And my husband, this was when we first started dating, he's like, is this normal? Like, is this your normal? And I was like,
Welcome to our family.
welcome. Yes, yes, actually, this is kind of weird, but yes. So, I mean, she feels a lot of freedom now. She's on, like, I lovingly kind of call her my teenager because she supports with babysitting, but she also needs her like alone time. She needs her
Sure.
time to go do her own thing. She wants to take the car, go off, and I'm like we took a trip to SeaWorld, and she stayed here, and I said, you can have friends over, like just no
Don't
boys
burn the
until,
house down.
don't have any boys stay over. I have to approve everyone you date because I'm going to filter them through the addict model first.
How could you not have those little triggers and traumas? And
Yeah.
I'm so glad for her that she kind of gets this second little chance at maybe
Yeah.
what a next chapter, you know? And I
Yeah.
hate that, I know she hates that it couldn't be a different chapter. If your dad could have gotten it together, if he could have lit, but this is the hand that's been dealt. And
Mhm.
it sounds like she and you are both just playing the hell out of it.
Yeah. We're very much at peace with how everything happened. It feels like it was his time. And like it that passing, while challenging, and it definitely threw me into 2 years of grief. And when you lose a parent, it's there is an identity shift that happens because especially when that parent is of high influence, and my dad was one of my most positive influences for business and wealth. He had one of the best money mindsets you could ever have, was super generous and loving, and also high earning, and he had his demons,
Sure.
and he was also my most negative influence. So being able to navigate, like there's a whole identity shift that happens when that transition occurs. And there's a mutual grieving process too, of there's not only what you've lost, but like what could have been. Like what you said is like the hope of that's no longer a possibility. But being able to look at uh, the future and seeing like my mom is in her third act. She started in her art business. I actually built her website and started her Instagram so that she can promote her art. And she's always wanted to go back to doing that. It just has never been a call. Like she was busy running a business, she was busy raising me. And I was always raised with this just I never saw a glass ceiling because she never saw a glass ceiling. I never saw a limit to my potential
Yep.
because she just literally never saw it. And so I'm so grateful that she gets to be here and the dynamic that we've worked out. Like she and my husband now watch like cheesy sci-fi together, and I couldn't be happier because I can't stand that.
You get a pass. You don't even have
I get a
to.
pass. There's no cheesy sci-fi I need to watch. Like
I love
not
it.
my jam. Yeah, yeah, they get to nerd out together, and while navigating the communication challenges, sometimes I think what makes it different is my mom has always respected our role as parents, and she's always respected the role. I think it's harder when you have someone like my dad's mother, my grandmother was did not honor that role. And when
Right.
you have a parent and you're doing multi-generational living with a parent who does not respect you as the primary parent,
Right.
that's where communication breakdowns and hardships really happen. But my mom has always had a deference of like you, like me and Spike, my husband, like we are the primary. So every decision gets filtered through us as far as discipline, how to deal with the challenge. I've told my mom, quite frankly, because she comes from a very different generation where women were more passive. I told her like you need to speak up when my kids are rude to you. Like that's unacceptable. I don't want them to think they can treat a woman that way. And she's having to learn how to assert her voice, which is very different than how she was with my dad. So there's like this blossoming that I'm seeing through her because she's growth minded. And I think that that's why she's 76, but she, like most people think she's in her 60s because she's so growth minded, open, and she's open to constantly learning.
Well, and I think that's such an important thing here that I'm glad you mentioned this growth mindset, because I do think that, the older generations, whether it's baby boomers, the one before them, it's just that the culture was so different. The way they were raised is so different. The mindset is different. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's this element of compassion that happens with us as elder millennials, Gen X's, where we are kind of able to get a front row seat to acknowledge why they are maybe the way they are. And I think the beauty happens when they're able to say, okay, yes, I was raised this way, or I might have believed this, but maybe I could believe something different, or maybe I could see what that feels like, or I could try that on. And I think that's a big differentiator between the most successful multi-generational living versus the ones that might feel bumpier when you've got some
Mm-hmm.
people driving in heels, because that's been my experience so far, is that you got to have that flexibility and that groove, because if you're in four different grooves and everybody's got their heels dug in, that you got to kind of go to growth
Yeah,
constantly, I would think.
constantly. And I'm constantly reading, like, I'm reading books on being a better parent. And then I'm asking that she read them as well. And my husband read them as well. And so there's a very open dialogue around parenting because she is a primary influence for my children. And so is my husband and so am I. And so we're shaping these two, soon to be three little humans, and I want them to see a healthy dynamic. I want them to see open communication. Like we have weekly board meetings,
Oh, good.
weekly family.
We were
Yeah.
going to get to this because I know that you and I've talked in the past about running families in similar ways to businesses. And you and I
Mhm.
have both been in business a really long time. We've grown successful multiple businesses. And
Mhm.
so the lessons that come with that, why shouldn't they be applied to families? Because it can be smoother, easier, faster, whatever. Talk to me about your family board meetings and the other systems that you've put in place that you think really make a difference.
So one of the things that money, because with money, that specifically is the biggest one that like takes down multi-generational families because it's
Mhm.
challenging. And now I say this and I preface this as having not had, like, I don't have siblings to work it out with.
Neither do I.
Like,
So we're
so
aligned here.
that's like it makes it simpler because I don't have siblings that I'm looking at sharing any sort of assets or investments with. But one of the things that was hard for me between 2022 and 2023, we ended up buying our house. And suddenly I started to create this whole story that because my mom was going to be retired, because my husband, like I've been more of a breadwinner for the past 6 years, um, that I had to suddenly take on this responsibility of the house. And I remember the most liberating moment was when my husband was like, let me take the house. Like, let me manage this. And I was like, oh my God, thank you. But I need to see how things are being managed. And so one of the biggest things was initially shame loves secrets in every way. And so initially I had shame about like managing the money, and the weird feelings come from inheriting money as well. Like where suddenly it's like, oh, there's this influx of cash. And what do we do with that and how do we spend it? And there were some decisions that I made that I didn't make with advising them that I wouldn't make again today, because I was in this place of I have to do all the things because now I am the head, like the queen of my household,
Right.
versus shifting that into like, this is my leadership team. We are co-leading and we're making decisions for the future generations. And when we shifted that mindset and started opening up the doors on bank accounts, on investment accounts, on decisions, on financial decisions, and just spread the doors wide open. This was also while my business was going through a cash flow hell. Like we were making some good revenue, but we were losing money every month. And that's why I constantly say revenue is vanity. Like when you see
True.
people blasting their numbers of like, oh my
Revenue
God,
and profits are not the
they are
same.
not the same at all. And
Yep.
especially like, so there was shame as a business owner that like I was struggling with putting in initiatives in my business, having that cash flow crunch that was then correlating to having personal cash flow crunches. And I was like, this sucks. And something had to change. And I said, we're going to blast the doors open with transparency. And like, because shame loves secrets, we're going to shed a light on everything and we're going to make it everything a unanimous decision. And we're going to shed the light. And when we shed the light, and I created this whole spreadsheet that has every single investment account, every single bank account, both for myself, my husband, my businesses, my mom, our business together. Like it, I said, this is the sheet that way there is transparency. That way we're not questioning, we're not looking at bank accounts and going, okay, well, like just the juggling that goes on and the amount of accounts that happens when you have multiple like estates that you're managing is insane. It's like initially that spreadsheet was columns long. And since we've been condensing it, but that ability to say, okay, we want transparency and we're going to discuss this every week. And so I'm constantly checking in with my board now about the status and progress of business, as well as the status and progress of my kids' homeschooling, as well as the status and progress of our investments and what's growing. And that transparency was liberating Now, not everybody is at a place where
Sure.
like there's egos involved. Like it took a lot of open conversations around shame, guilt, because like there's people have financial trauma and
Oh,
like
yeah, and
generational trauma
stories. They have
and
stories that they're
stories.
tied to.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we really took a look at all of that evaluation of like, okay, well, what are our financial stories that we have going on? What are some things that we want to look at
Yep.
investing in and supporting that will build generational wealth, that will allow like what we've been given to then expand beyond that, and what we're also simultaneously creating to expand beyond just us. And those conversations and having that weekly meeting, we were able to transform a cash flow hell in 45 days because of transparency. And that was both professionally and personally.
Sure.
So,
Well, and I
yeah,
think
that,
maybe the communication styles, speaking of that growth mindset, money is such a polarizing, sticky thing sometimes. And I know this from having, I mean, it almost imploded our multi-gen journey before we got out the door because
yeah.
there were some conversations being had and it just wasn't going well. Um, and I think being able to bust open the doors and talk about things as they are rather than as they should be, as we wish they were, as we thought they were. If you can just see things, here are the numbers. Here are these
Mm-hmm.
columns. Here are like we there no doesn't there is no story tied to that number. This is
Yes.
just the amount. And we need to make decisions, but I think that it can really, like you said, lift a weight on a topic that a lot of people shy away from because it can be such a beast.
Mm-hmm.
And
And it's hard, especially when you feel like you're failing or letting someone down. I mean, I think also being a second generation entrepreneur really helps, because I was having a conversation with my mom about a year ago, and we were in this space of struggling with cash flow and like this crunch of like revenue, but then our scaling initiatives required hiring more team. And I was like, Mom, I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to pay my team within in the next 2 weeks. Like, it's just like, this is really a hard. And my mom goes, Oh, you have 2 weeks? She goes, I remember there were some times where we would only have 2 days.
she's like, oh, this is a weight lifted. Yeah. And this, again, as entrepreneurs, this is how it goes. I mean, this is
Yeah.
business. It is not predictable always. There will
Yeah.
be valleys and there will be incredible views at the top, but they're not permanent. And we don't want them to be because we're growing, we're evolving, and it's scary as fuck sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And we do the things. And I love what you're saying. And I want to back up for a second too about the entrepreneur piece because I too am a third generation entrepreneur. My grandmother moved to the South in the 60s and started the first preschool in the entire state of South Carolina. People
So
thought she had
cool.
lost her mind, but her husband had died. She didn't have anything to do with her young kids. And she's like, what could I do for work that I could take my kids? So she built this thing and spent years educating the public on the news channels at lunch about moms being able to leave their kids with strangers. So she built this, and it lasted for 50 years and grew multiple centers and all this stuff. Then my mom took it over. My mom was
Mm-hmm.
an RN, had had enough, took over in the 90s and grew again. And it was like I grew up watching women carve their path and run life like business. And so the feeling of getting to do that with my daughter and having her watch and be part of these family meetings and this talk about, we don't keep most things off the table. I mean, we talk about money, we talk about shame, we talk
Same.
about, and I love that you're doing that too with your boys and soon to be your daughter. And you've got your mom entrepreneur, you've got you, and you're raising entrepreneurs. Talk to me a little bit about the homeschooling and the entrepreneurs that you're raising.
So homeschooling came out of just necessity. Like I had never planned on being a homeschooling mom because the paradigm that I lived under with homeschoolers from 30 years ago was like
Right.
homeschoolers are weird.
Yeah.
Like that was the paradigm. And I knew families that had homeschooled their kid. I'm like, those kids are a little weird. Like there's like but I think there's the shift came when we had Declan, who's my eldest, who's was 5. He was in a preschool in Australia, and we loved it. It was so perfectly divine timed, and it just like that was great for that season. But then we moved back to California. I was like, I don't want to put him in something and then take him out. Um, Homeschooling California, I looked at it and I was like, oh hell no. Like you have to submit all of your requirements to the state. Like it is a co-parenting relationship that you have with the state in California. And I was like, no, let's look at Texas. And had there been the one school that I would put in my kids in is an Acton school,
Okay.
but there are no ones that are close. And Acton, it focuses on a model where the teachers aren't teachers. They're not this like blatant authority. They are coaches and they guide you into learning how you learn. And these kids are brilliant. They go off at like 7th, 8th grade and have internships at SpaceX. Like, and that's my son's dream. So we're modeling that process, but we're just doing it at home because the closest Acton school is an hour away from us.
Gotcha.
So when we looked at homeschool, I was like, well, okay, well, what are the requirements? Well, Texas is very lax with their requirements with homeschool and as far as like what you have to do. So I said, well, and there's pros and cons to that because there's pros of being in a family that is highly educated, entrepreneurial, that's
Committed to doing the
committed to
thing.
the doing the thing versus, oh, it's lax, so my kid can just kind of do whatever.
Right.
So when I had to have a mindset shift around homeschooling from being this teacher, because I was like, okay, wait, I'm running 2 businesses, now 3 with the one I inherited from my parents as well, not their tree business, but their real estate business. And I'm like, okay, we're doing 3 things. And homeschooling was like, this is no. So I'm looking at like what are each of our strengths? And I'm strong in English. I like writing is my love language. Words I just love. That's you and I get each other on words. Grammar not so great at. But my husband, he's brilliant with like tools and fixing things and chefs and like life skills. So he's helping the boys with that. My mom, she's great with art and she's great with business. And so being able to look at our strengths and see how can we allow, and my son is naturally gifted in math. So I looked at, okay, the curriculum. I went to a homeschool convention and I said, okay, well, the curriculum typically, when I realized that only the kids who are in school, like traditional public school, are only learning for about 7 minutes out of every hour. I was like, ooh, those numbers do not bode well. So I said, if they're only learning for 7 minutes out of every hour, then how can we collapse time?
Yep.
Because entrepreneurs love efficiency. And so I sit with my son, or my husband sits with him, or my mom sits with him as he does his work. And we just are there as a support and a guide and a resource. For him to complete his work. And he has a certain goal that he's set. We let him set his own goals. So he has a goal to be in 4th grade by the end of this year. So I said, okay, we got to work backward. We are chat GPTing his ultimate life goals, which one of his life goals is he wants to be the youngest person on the moon. So at the age of 21. And I said, great, we're going to work backward from that. Let's see what you have to get to in order to get to that goal. And we leverage the skills of entrepreneurship. He takes our corporate minutes. Because he loves math, and he recognizes the beauty that each person has their own strengths. And so he says, mommy's the best teacher. Daddy's the best chef. Grandma's the best artist. Colton's the best climber. He's the best at math. So he's recognizing the beauty of diversity of skill sets. And that's what I want. And so, and then also on top of that, we have extracurriculars that he's in. So we wanted to make sure that we're in the business of raising gentlemen, soon to be a lady as well. But that when we were looking at education standards from years ago, we're like, what extracurriculars were required? And we've always said we wanted martial arts. We wanted the discipline of physical exercise. So right now he's at a homeschool PE class. We wanted the discipline of dance, of whether it doesn't matter what form, he can change the form, but they're going to stick to a commitment and then allow for that evolution. He expressed a desire to do more art. I said, let's find you an art class. And so there's a ton of resources now, I think, especially after COVID,
For sure.
for extracurricular classes that support homeschool so that you're not you don't feel obligatory, or there's the pregnancy brain kicking in. You don't feel the obligation of being the be all and end all teacher, because that was the pressure for me with homeschool, where I was like, homeschool, I have to be this be all and end all and do this and do that. No, I looked at how can I create a supportive network. So we put him in a math program that is just, they just love him. He's the only kid that goes that is like, I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah.
Versus
Well, I
every
think
other
that's the
kid is there
piece.
for tutoring.
You're doing these
Yeah.
outside resources. You have your internal, everyone's taking a different piece. You've got the environment. I know you live with animals and farm. I mean, you've got so many pieces that are shaping, it's very much a legacy building mindset happening in your home, and it's so incredible. And I know that from my perspective, it's very similar here, and why we've done this expat lifestyle for so long, raising a global citizen and counting on cultures and foods and different lifestyles to help do some of those pieces too. So I love that you are thinking legacy in just about every piece of the puzzle. And I know we're toward the end. I want to touch really quickly on the building of your mom's space when she will move outside of your house. What has that always been the plan? Is she excited for this piece? How do you envision? I envision it being just enhancing all the good when that happens. Like
Yeah, I'm a big fan of test runs.
yeah,
So test runs and experiments. So just like in business, you'll run certain experiments with different initiatives. I'm a big fan of like, let's test it and see how it, and see what my mom really likes. So when we took our SeaWorld trip, she got the house for a few days all to herself. She got to be like, my mom and I are very different, polar opposites in many ways. I have always been interested in fashion and dress and I'm hyper organized. Even my 7-year-old son came into my office. He goes, "Mommy, your office is so clean. That's not like grandma's office." I was like, "Yep, yeah. Grandma and I are different in that regard."
yeah.
And yet grandma knows where everything is in her office, and I wouldn't touch her organizational systems. I just can't go in there because it would drive me absolutely batty. And so she got to be messy, and she got to spread all her art around all the tables, and she loved it. And she's super respectful about like keeping her container of mess and what she loves into her area of the house.
Okay.
But at the same time, I know she wants she wants more space, and she wants a better art studio as well. So the plan was always to have either see if when we were looking for a house, we were very specific with what we were manifesting. And we actually sat down as a family, my husband, my mom, and I, and we made a list of everything we wanted in the house. We actually have it
Same.
framed in our house because we manifested absolutely everything on that list. It came out in perfect design. The only
Same.
thing it didn't have was a backup generator. And then we got that. I was like, that's a $30,000 install. We can do that.
Yeah.
So that was beautiful, and in just being very clear and specific with what we wanted. My mom was a little hesitant at first of like, okay, well, if you're going to plan on having more kids, like where would the room? And I said, we will build a separate house. Like we have 10 acres, we have space to build a separate house. But actually for right now, with the kids being so young, it's really helpful having her in house because
Sure.
she can go across to their room. If one of them is crying, she can take them down for breakfast. And they love to go in and wake grandma and like scare her and wake grandma up. So eventually her room will turn into my daughter's room within time. But I think I've always thought the idea of a nursery is absolutely insane
Big way.
because
It's a lot of money
it's
for
the
not
big
a,
one.
yeah.
They're never in it. I'm like, finally, we have the space and the ability to do a nursery. And I'm like, I don't want, like, that just seems not
Pretty wasteful.
efficient,
Yeah.
pretty wasteful, because I know we co-sleep. We've co-slept with both of our boys up until the age of like 2.5, 3. And then they go off and they have their own room and their space. And I'm a big fan of just the bonding that happens within those very formative years. And having her close to me is just like how I've had my boys and how I've grown them. So the idea that the house for our property, we had this idea that nothing was stagnant. And when we bought the house, I said, I want to be very clear that this house is an evolution with us. Because if it's not an evolution, then we have to go through a move again.
Right.
And I don't want to do that. But allowing it to be an evolution of this house is going to evolve and grow and change with our needs as our kids grow and evolve through it. And that's what I really wanted and foresaw. And so she's very excited to have her art studio and to have her space. And we're planning on building a space for an ADU for down the road if she needs a live-in nurse. But in the meantime, when that's built, like I've always seen our places being able to have a community. I mean, we have a big garden and space. I would love to be able to support a single mom for a while so that she could stay and live there with a child as an additional form of revenue, but also be some form of being able to support and just be in community together.
Yeah.
So there's so much magic that comes when you allow yourself to think outside of the box for the traditional norms of what you see. Because just because it's common doesn't mean it has to be common for you. It doesn't mean it also has to work for you. And I think as entrepreneurs, we're more used to thinking out of the box, finding alternative strategies to make life work for us, because otherwise we would just have a job.
Right. 100%. And that being able to pivot as many times to create the new path, I
Yeah.
think is so important. Like you go in with a vision, but if you have to finagle and make it happen, it's incredible. And I think the other important thing that you're noting here too is the importance of thinking down the road and the planning piece. You bought this house knowing it would evolve, but you already were thinking, okay, by having this 10-acre space, we can build this. We might do this. We might have an ADU that we rent out as an Airbnb. Or I
Mm-hmm.
think it's good for folks to think about these things before they just take the first thing that comes along. Or you don't ever want to approach these decisions from a place of fear or lack, always from abundance and planning. And I
Yeah.
think that's so great. Okay, let me ask you one last question and then we're gonna wrap. If someone is considering multi-generational living right now, and they're on the cusp or they've already set off down the path, what would be one thing you would want them to know right out of the gate?
Transparency. Like, operate with transparency in your communication, in your finances, in your decision making, and allow yourself to speak your truth and allow for other people, including your parents, including your kids, to also speak their truth as well, so that everyone is in a space where they're feeling heard, valued, seen, and understood.
Perfect. Yeah, I couldn't agree. A big fat ditto from me. So thank you so much for coming today and sharing your business mind, your mama mind, your beautiful heart. And I'm so grateful.
Absolutely. Oh, the other thing that I would add is like get a Trello board.
Get some sort of
get some
organization.
sort of
Yes.
like project management, like
Yep.
leverage project management and train. Like I know sometimes like elders are not as great with technology, but train
Yep.
them to some extent that they have access. Because one of the biggest things that was a challenge with my mom was that she didn't want to feel like she didn't want to have the control of having to make all the decisions, but she also didn't want to feel like she was not involved with the
Removed.
transparency of making decisions. And she wanted to have access so that she could see everything as well. And so at the bare minimum, train them on how to log into the project management system to just and to know what they're looking at. And with that, having a transparent project management system for your family as well as for your business, game changer, because that's how transparency is. Even if it's on a piece of paper, even if it's on a whiteboard and you list all your bills on a whiteboard, that can be a system too. But just having it showcased so that everyone can see what you're working toward, because you are now operating as a multi-generational family as a very holistic team.
Sure. Well, and I want to just take that a step further of even if you aren't to the point of getting a project management system, what can you put into place? With my parents, we started with a shared note on the Notes app. And as things popped into their head, I showed them just put them here and I will put them where they go. And we had checklists and we also do with money. We have some apps that help us. So when an expense or a bill is paid, everyone, knows. So start baby steps. If you aren't ready for something, just make sure that everyone can stay in the loop somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful.